Hello.
Hi Sandeep, can you hear me?
Yes, there is a little bit of echo, but I can hear you.
How are you, Karishma this side?
Hey, Karishma, I'm doing good. There's still a lot of echo.
Yeah, just a second, I'll just correct
Sure.
you. Is it fine now? No. Again.
No.
Just a second.
Sure.
Is it better now?
It is better.
Great. So, Sandeep, we'll just start in next 14 minutes.
Sure.
Great, cool. Thanks.
And and can you hear me okay? Do you see me okay?
Yeah,
Any change in that part?
I think it's perfectly fine.
Thank
And
you. And I assume you saw my note earlier on the questions as well.
could you please repeat that?
Did you see my note earlier? Earlier in the day I sent about the questions.
Yeah, the edits which you gave?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Sounds good.
Good.
All right. So I'm going to put myself on mute, but whenever we're starting, just give me like
Sure,
heads up
I'll just
before
give
1
you a
minute.
heads up a minute before.
Sure. Thanks.
Thanks. Hi, Sandeep. Let's just start.
Sure.
Just a moment. Thank you all for joining us today and welcome to the webinar, How to Become Successful in Management Consulting Career with Sandeep Patil. So here is quickly we'll discuss today's agenda. Before we start the webinar, I'll quickly take you through the agenda of the webinar so that we all are on the same page. So we'll start with today High Counselor's introduction, then we'll introduce you to our guest speaker, and we'll follow by a question and answer session, which is an opportunity for you all to ask questions with our guest speaker. And then we'll quickly introduce ourselves with a few important information. So before we get started, I quickly want to make you update with few ground rules and info about the structure of the webinar. Today's webinar will have a question and answer structure, which I'll let you ask, in which I'll let you ask questions from our guest speaker. We are live on YouTube, and you can post your questions here in the comment section, and even you can share this video and like also by hitting the like icon on the YouTube channel. So we do conduct a lot of such webinars every week. I would request you all to please stay tuned to the end of the webinar for more information. Before we introduce ourselves, we would just quickly before we just quickly move forward, I would quickly like to introduce ourselves, who we are. So we are High Counselor, an online and mobile platform that helps job seekers and students land their dream job by connecting them to employees who work at their dream company. I'm sure you all know today getting coaching from a company insider can dramatically increase your chances, not only to ensure that the job you are aiming for is for the right fit, but also that you land in your dream job. So stay tuned until the end of the webinar and we'll give you a lot more information about the other events as well. We'll be hosting regularly free events like this, so please sign up on our platform so that we can keep you updated about the upcoming awesome webinar. So I would like to introduce Sandeep Patil, the Manager of Strategy and Operations at HP. Thank you so much, Sandeep, for your valuable time and participation, and we would love to know more about your experience and professional background. Over to you, Sandeep.
Thank you, Karishma. First of all, it's a really wonderful platform, and it's amazing service you're providing to all the job seekers. Myself, again, my name is Sandeep Patil. I have overall 13 years of experience leading strategic planning and operations across technology and industrial engineering sectors. And one common thread always had been that I always help the organizations I work for to drive the scale. Starting currently at HP, I'm a senior manager for strategy and operations for marketing organization. I lead the team for, precisely doing three things. One, I sort of quarterback the whole operation planning and budgeting process for our team. I also partner with our senior executives to understand our overall marketing investment spend profile. We invest several hundreds of $1 million in 60 plus countries, and I work closely with our executive leadership to make the data informed decision. And third, I execute on strategically most important projects in our group. Mostly they are vague in nature, require some sort of frameworking or structure around it. So once it is in a place where I can hand it over to other team, then it's in its motion. Previously, before HP, I was part of KPMG, and that's why we are here. I was part of KPMG's financial management practice, where I had opportunity to work with several Fortune 500 companies, where I advised executives on their strategic and operational challenges. And it was a really wonderful experience, and I believe that has set me for my career path that I have today, and had a very strong experience during that time. And prior to my MBA, I also have 4.5 years of experience as a design engineer, where I built and led the teams as well. So you can see I have a wide spectrum of experience from tactical execution to all the way to strategic planning at enterprise level. So happy to be here. Happy to answer any questions you have, and I hope uh, by the end of this conversation, our audience takes away a few pointers that will be helpful to them.
Thank you so much, Sandeep, for the lovely introduction. We really loved it, and we really look forward, for a lot of engaging questions and answers so that our attendees can get most of the benefit out of it. So great. So I'll ask you my question. So my first question is, how will you define management consulting?
To me, again, there are various definitions out there. To me, management consulting is all about selling the confidence. You see, when you get into management consulting, you get to work with some of the finest companies out there. Best of the automobile manufacturers to best of the technology companies, and you are asked to come and help them in one of the very specific area that they're probably struggling with or not having enough speed to solve it. At that time, you go in, you bring in, basically you do precisely two or three things. If you're successful as a management consultant, you bring fresh perspective, you look at the problem in different angle, you look at different data, and do ton of analysis, and third, you build some solid recommendations that they can use to make the decision. And by that time, most of the time, you will see these executive teams, they know those recommendations or they know the answers. But more often you hear them say, oh, that's interesting. You know what, we thought about that as an answer, but we were not sure if we'll be successful in doing that. Now with you guys here, with all the analysis that you have walked us through, we are confident to make those decisions. And that's, to me, as a management consultant, that's the most successful currency you have, that you can make someone confident in making the decisions for their organization and their teams. That's how I define management consulting.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for the lovely answer. So great. Can you speak or provide information on type of assignments for us?
Can you repeat that question?
I will say that. Can you speak or provide information on type of assignments for us? Like what
sure.
Type of, yeah.
Depending on which group you're part of. So I was part of KPMG's financial management practice. As I said, I was based in Silicon Valley office. I was involved in multiple engagements. Could be something like target operating model. So you go in and define a future state definition that a company wants to develop. So what's the current state it looks like? What are their challenges? What are they trying to solve? What would they like to achieve? And how that future state would look like? And in that sense, how would you sell the products? How would you reconcile your financial engagements? How do you improve your operations? Those would be some of the examples. Or another segue would be market sizing. If you were to launch a new product, how many people are there out who can really buy from that, who can buy those products or services? Or another good example would be developing go-to-market techniques. If you're going from a product to service, are your sales teams enabled to do that? Or just various types of operational or financial efficiencies, or building robust governance around the organizational teams. Those would be good examples of any assignment in management consulting.
Great. Thank you so much for the answer. So apart from this, how do you go from one assignment to another?
That's very interesting, and I had asked this to my colleagues when I was back in consulting, and I continue to chat with my friends who are still in consulting. One thing that's very interesting in management consulting is there are very different clients out there and different industries. So it's very important that when you are on an assignment, you absorb as much knowledge about that industry, about that company, about what's working, what's not working. But between this assignment and next, usually don't get a lot of time, usually 1 or 2 weeks. So the best thing I always advise my friends or anyone who asks me this question is, one, try to relax between two assignments, don't get jittery, because as a consultant, you are valued upon how much hours you're billing, right? So between two projects, there could be a time of 2 or 3 weeks where you don't have any assignment, you don't have any billing, so that might get you nervous. Don't be nervous about it. Try to relax and just re-energize yourself. And you usually have a sort of idea of where you'll be going next. So try to get more information on that industry. So in a way, it's kind of not forgetting, but keeping it aside what you were doing earlier and now doing altogether differently. So for me, there was a time where I went from all the way from automobile sector to technology sector, or within technology networking industry. So it was important that I stopped thinking about for a while from what worked in automobile sector and start studying about what's happening in networking industry. The plus side of it is there are so many things that works in one industry can be applied in different industry, and sometimes people don't see that way. When you are in same industry for many years, you don't have that kind of exposure. So going from one assignment to another, you always want to have that perspective that yes, I learned great ton of things from one assignment. Now I want to learn about new industry, but I also want to see what are the parallels, what are the things that I can take from here and apply into the next industry.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So, could you please give us some advice how to break into management consulting?
Uh, that's very, again, good question. Uh, One of the typical ways we have seen is a lot of MBA students after their MBA graduation try to get into consulting. A lot of management consulting firms have programs where they recruit from either undergrad or grad schools. So that's definitely one way where you can think about. That's one, doesn't guarantee you if you're in grad school, doesn't guarantee you will get into MBA. Into management consulting, but it's a good segue. But I also want to encourage those who have worked in, let's say, one industry for let's say 10 to 15 years. That's also very attractive background for management consulting firms, because management consulting firms love to sell on the fact that they have resources that have industry expertise for that particular sector. And if you are what you bring to the table for those consulting firms is that deep expertise that you have. Let's say you worked uh, in supply chain industry, in operations oriented role for, let's say, 10 years. Management consulting firms actually value that kind of experience, because you can always go broad with generic skill sets on multiple industries, and or you can go vertical in one industry. And you need both to be successful in any consulting firm. So I always encourage folks that have deep experience or expertise in one particular industry, please explore those opportunities. But most, coming back to my previous comment, mostly the MBA students have, I think, seen more success in getting into consulting firms, just because there are defined programs in large, at least mid-sized to large consulting firms, to have them come in at associate or analyst level, or sometimes senior associate level, and grow from there. And it's usually a good career path to get into consulting firms.
Great. Thank you so much. So, Sandeep, what do you think? What is the best job search strategy for our management consulting position?
I do believe you know sessions like this are always helpful. I wish there were resources like this available 8 years back when I was trying to break into consulting firms. Uh, but one, ton of research. Uh, that's number one. Just understand what you want to do, what you can do, and what value do you add if you were to join a consulting firm. That has to be absolutely clear. And for that, you may want to talk to your professors, you want to talk to your friends, you want to talk to your colleagues, and get that value statement about yourself, that here are three things I bring to the table, and that's why I would be successful in consulting. Before anyone asks you, that something has to be clear in your mind. That's number one. Number two, networking. uh, Networking is sometimes it's a cliche, sometimes it's overused word, and sometimes it's done very poorly or wrong for wrong reasons. You don't want to network just to ask for a job or ask for a job interview, but you want to network to understand what's a day like in consulting. What are the assignments? What kind of work you do, or how do you solve a challenging assignment, or uh, how do you solve something in terms of people management perspective in consulting? How do you work without authority or hierarchy at your client place? Those are the questions you want to have clarity, and those are the kind of questions you want to understand by networking, and that's what I mean by networking. Ton of information interviews. I remember back in the days, I probably had 30 to 40 information interviews with folks who were doing management consulting works, and hardly any of them turned into any interview, to be honest. And I was still wanted to talk to these folks because I know the information I would get from those conversations would be very much useful in future for me, and they were for right reasons. So that's number two. And number three, uh, you want to, most consulting firms have different ways to interviews, but uh, something like case studies, you want to practice a lot, a ton of them, because you don't want to wait until your interviews are lining up. You want to be really uh, very good at that case study skill sets, which takes time to build. So that's something, I believe is a, those are three good job search strategies for breaking into consulting.
Wow, fantastic. I'm sure that's going to be really helpful for our attendees, Sandeep. Thank you so much. So, apart from this, what do you think are the three tips to make your resume stand out for a management consultant position?
So, uh, you know, most resume, I think when it comes to resume, management consulting firms luckily don't have a separate format or structure as such. So anytime you're doing a job search, the structure wise, it's still same. So what you hear from a regular recruiter still applies to the resumes for consulting jobs as well. For example, it has to be precise, it has to be accurate, no spelling errors, things like those. However, besides that, you also want to exhibit where you led without authority. You want to exhibit what are the key results. So something in resume everyone tries to follow is STAR format: situation, task, analysis, results. And I know there are other ways that you define STAR format, but that's key to any resume. And it's more emphasized when the recruiters are trying to look for future management consultant. Are you just looking at resume? Can I see you are a structured person? Can I see you have ability to lead through certain complexity and arrive to conclusion? And do you have uh, any examples where you can walk through uh, situation where you didn't have a certain title or position, but you still were able to solve the problem? How did you speak to your supervisors and executive leadership? Can you go in front of bunch of VPs and explain something to them even if they disagree? Those are the kind of things you want to think about when you're preparing your resume. Does my resume exhibit that? So those would be my tips to uh, anyone who's looking into get your resume noticed by management consultant recruiters.
Great. Thank you so much, Sandeep. So, my next question would be, what are the three key skills that a management consultant can't do without?
Uh, that's again good question. I think nowadays you need more than three, but in my mind, three things that absolutely stand when it comes to management consulting. One is empathy. You need to have empathy not just with the team that you're working with, but also the problem that you're solving for. You want to go in someone's shoes and try to solve that problem. You just don't want to solve what's been told. For example, let's say if a company hires a consulting team to solve their issues related to raising costs. Their costs are going up, and that's impacting their profitability. How do you solve that? You just don't want to look at that. You want to be in, let's say, CFO has hired you. Be in CFO shoes. Think about CFO. Why this is important for him, right, or her, and what would what will it take to solve this? And if we solve just the cost problem, will that be success for CFO? If not, let's look at what other factors are, and let's try to get that perspective when we do the work. So having that empathetic viewpoint, not just for the person but also for the problem, is very important, especially in today's agent work. Second, goes without saying, you have to have a very strong analytical mind. Uh, and there are ways you can develop, there are ways you can practice it. Uh, that's something if you want to go in consulting, let's say 5 years from now on, be on analytical side in your current work, in your current coursework, in your current education, whatever it may be. You have to be very strong when it comes to numbers. You have to have not just data crunching, but what insights you build on top of that. So that's number two. Number three, the key reason a lot of organizations hire management consultant is not because they don't know what the answer is. They sometimes know more than you, because there is a reason they exist, because they are good at what they do. But then either there is uh, not not enough alignment within the organization, or there is not enough outsider perspective that they have. So there comes a point where you do all the analysis, all the questions and answers, and you build your recommendation. There comes a point in most of the assignments where you have to be comfortable having uncomfortable conversations. Could be anything like, hey, VP X is not aligning with VP Y, and that's probably the reason for this situation that we are in. How can we get them? Can we get them together? How can we get them in one room and align on our future way of doing the work? Or there could be two different groups within the organization, going head to head and not looking at the bigger picture. Can you bring heads of those two units and solve that problem? Those are situations where you had to be very comfortable uh, with what you are recommending and stick to your point, not being aggressive, but again, going back to my first point, being empathetic to the whole situation. Can you solve that? So being comfortable in that uncomfortable situation is very much important. And nowadays everyone have sometimes very strong opinions. So how do you maneuver through those situations? That's very important. And I think that's the third skill set you can't live without as a management consultant.
Thank you so much, Sandeep, for the wonderful answer. So, Sandeep, what do you think is the interview format of a management consulting position? I mean, in terms of technical, behavioral, etc.
Sure. So usually there are I've seen now two patterns emerging. One, the old school pattern, which is heavy case study driven, uh, where you start with first a behavioral sort of interview with the HR person, and the HR person is basically looking at your overall profile, and if you're good enough to pass on to the next level, where you will have a case study with either engagement manager or director level person within the firm. And that's where the old school format comes in. And I'll come back to this real quick. The second one is the emerging scenarios. Oh, the case study is too stressful, we don't want to stress our candidates, let's have conversation, let's ask more like situational or situational cross behavioral cross case study type of questions, so candidates don't feel stressed out and we don't lose a good candidate because of that. uh, this one is still emerging, and not many companies do, but it exists. Coming back to previous one, the case study format. The reason that consulting firms do case studies is that's something you will be doing as you start working. So it's not something, it's not a pressure test, it's not a stress test where if you can survive this, you can survive anything. It's not really like that. It's really the fact that you will be going into an organization and you will be doing these kind of interviews with the client person, you will be asking these questions. Sometimes these kind of questions will be asked to you, and you want to have answer. And how do you answer matters. Whenever you're going into any assignment, the organizations pay sort of money that's really those are the top dollars they pay. So they want to have best value out of their money. So are you the person who will bring more value than what they're paying for? That's what is the main reason for case studies. So let's talk about that for real quick. What is a case study? Case study is it's a situation. Again, there are two uh, ways they ask, and one is now diminishing versus the other. One is the one that's diminishing is uh, how many golf balls will fit into a container or a truck, right? There you don't have to have a uh, exact answer, but they try to test you how do you come to the math. It's not about getting the accurate math, but it's getting the accurate structure. Do you get to that point quickly, precisely, and does that answer be in somewhere vicinity? You're not guessing. You're not being lucky to answer, oh, there will be 8,763 golf balls that will fit into a container. No, that's not they're looking for. They are looking for, okay, a box is 2 by 2, so there will be 100 box in one row, so there will be 2,000 rows. That's why I come to this answer, right? And you will make certain assumption. The second type in the case study is they'll give you actual scenario. A moving company wants to go into a different market. They currently serve Atlanta market. Now they want to go into New York. Is that a good idea? Do you think they should be doing it? What would you recommend? Now, this is a real life assignment probably for that partner, for that director who's asking you. So that's where you build a proper structure, and you come to the conclusion whether to go or not, and you also make a ton of assumptions. So how do you articulate that? That's what gets you to the next level. And finally, there's one more interview, usually with the partner level person, to make sure, yes, this is the right candidate. So that's most common format, where you have behavioral interview, you have a case study, one or two case studies sometimes, and then partner interview. And that's if you go through all those filters, you're good to go.
Thank you so much, Sandeep. Great. So here comes my next question. What are the three best books or resources to aid in management consulting interview preparation?
When it comes to books, I mean, there are a ton of books nowadays. One book I remember I thought was very useful was The McKinsey Way. Even though you're not going, probably, let's say you think, yeah, I'm not going to work for McKinsey, still I would recommend to read it. It's the rule where you might have seen me doing everything in three. There are three factors, there are three this, three that. It actually works in consulting, and that's something, now it's ingrained in my way of thinking, way of structuring things. Uh, the book says that it comes from McKinsey. It's a McKinsey way. Break everything into three, and how do you think about a problem? If it's less than three, you're not thinking enough. If it's more than three, you're not looking at high level enough. That's what they say. So and it also has a ton of examples on different McKinsey assignments. So I would recommend that as one resource. Number two, my favorite is caseinterview.com. Victor Cheng is a known authority in terms of case studies, and he has a ton of free and paid material that's very useful on how to practice case studies, how to crack through interviews. He has a platform where people share a ton of information on how their interviews went. So that would be another good resource. And third, I would say your own network. Your own friends. If you want to get into consulting, one thing I realized, like I have a friend who wanted to get into consulting as well. So we practice a lot in terms of case studies. So by the time we got into interviews, we were ready. We were ready to go. We were not nervous about the whole structure. We were nervous about the interviews, and I want to make sure we'll be successful. But by that time, we had ton of practice with each other. We had criticized each other's way of thinking, and we knew what our drawbacks are, or where we should be asking more questions. So that's really your best resource. is your own network. And that's where, going back to my previous point, the informational interviews are very, very important for that perspective. So those will be my three resources: McKinsey Way, caseinterview.com, and your own network.
Great. Thank you so much, Sandeep. Thanks a ton. So, apart from this, Sandeep, what do you think? Three things a candidate should consider while selecting an employer for a management consulting position.
Um, Typically, there are big three, big four consulting firms, and then there are a ton of consulting firms that are specialized in particular area. So depending on your interest, I would say uh, pick and choose the the employer that you want to work with. Uh, there are consulting firms that are only focused on people management. There are consulting firms that are solely focusing on IT technology practice. If you want to develop your career, if you are interested in going into solving critical IT uh, technology and factors that affect whole organization, yes, that would be a good segue into going into those kind of firms. So research a ton and see what kind of and that's going back again to informational interviews. Ask these kind of questions like what kind of assignments you get. There are some organizations that some firms that say they do everything, but they're usually good in one or two things. It's not easy to get um, consulting assignments in all the sectors all the time for mid-sized to small consulting firms. But for those one or two areas, they have really lot of leverage. They have really a ton of expertise. Uh, so you should think about that. For example, there's a firm in Bay Area. They specialize in accounting practices for companies that like to go IPO quickly. So either you want to go or IPO or not, if you're a startup, they help you in establishing accounting and finance practices within your small setup. Uh, Now, if you are interested in working with startups and if you have accounting background, if you love setting, accounting structure, the whole architecture around it, and how to keep the books, all of that, that's the firm you should target. That's the firm you want to go ahead and find people on LinkedIn and talk to them and see if that's if there is a mutual interest. And that's how you generate the interest from the firm side as well, because they will also be thinking from their perspective. They will be also looking for people who are really passionate about accounting and startups, right? So there are a ton of firms that do specialize only in HR practices. If you have HR background, you should look into that. So don't just go by name or the size, but look at the expertise in the practice that you're interested in. And that's how I would go about it.
Great. Thank you so much. That was really wonderful. So, with this, with your such valuable things that one should consider, could you please even brief like which are the top management consulting firms to work for?
Uh, well,
If a
the
candidate should.
sure. I mean, again, the answer will vary, but the top three are BCG, McKinsey, and Bain. They are considered the premium most, more like strategy consulting firm than just management consulting, but they are the top three consulting firm. When it comes to management consulting, the big four is KPMG, where I worked, and then PwC, Deloitte, and Ernst and Young. Those will be the top firms that you want to consider. But then there are other firms like IBM Consulting is doing great ton of work. Accenture doing same thing. They have moved just doing IT or outsourcing work to other areas. Uh, so those would be in top firms as well. But again, yeah, I mean, I would not hold this answer as the perfect answer. There are various other firms doing great work. These are the firms that I consider, to start your career in consulting.
Great. Thank you so much, Sandeep. So, what advices do you have for aspiring candidates to be successful in a management consulting role?
Uh, I mean, one thing I would say is be always look out for the blind spots that you go in. Sometimes we think, after you do few assignments, you feel like, yeah, I got this. I know what's the problem is. So you start guessing. This could be the problem. That could be the problem. You don't want to do that. You always want to go with that fresh perspective when it comes to looking at the consulting. Looking at the client situation. So that's number one. Because if you don't do that well, there will be blind spot that will hit you very hard sooner or later. Number two, this question has been asked again and again. Let's say if you are in assignment and if you do a mistake, what happens? Now, uh, one thing for sure is there is not enough opportunities to make mistakes in consulting, right? That's given. That doesn't mean you cannot make mistakes. It only means that you want to double check your work. You want to have a safe environment. You want to have uh, a, uh, a an opportunity to show your work to someone. So have that loop, or have that uh, the situation worked out in every assignment, that where you can rely on someone to check your work from that perspective. And uh, along with that, even if you make a mistake, that's not the end of the world. Be first to tell that, like, hey, I made a mistake, this is thing I want to correct, before anyone else finds out. So that's number two. Number three, do it for the right reasons. Do it because you are passionate about solving the problem. Do it because you're okay with not having actual ownership or authority, but you still enjoy helping the companies to solve their problems. So those are the right reasons you want to do it. So that would be my advice.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sandeep. So, thanks so much for such wonderful advices, I would say. So, what do you think is the career path of a management consultant?
There are two ways to think about it. One is within consulting firms, you grow in terms of uh, going from as an starting from analyst to associate to senior consultant to project manager or engagement manager, and then to director level, and then either partner or principal, depending on how your firm has. And what that means is essentially you do good job in your current position and you start taking responsibilities for your next role, and you have that conversations continuously with your supervisors, and that's how you carve your path. And again, you could be growing in a particular function. uh, there are uh, there are people, I know some of my friends who have developed niche in Oracle suite of applications. So doesn't matter what industry is, if it's Oracle related work, they get called for, and uh, they work for, and they have grown in that area. And then there are people who have focused on industry specific, either it's just social media, or uh, just the technology within technology sector, networking, or IT peripheral, or servers, for example. So depending on what career path you choose, you can grow into that area. The second way of thinking it is the way I've done so far is you can use that experience and then grow into go back into industry as well. Uh, I moved out of consulting in 2015 and got into in my current role at HP because I found a role which was, very much similar to what I was doing in consulting. But now I have certain ownership and authority over doing things, and I wanted that experience. Having said that, they say once a consultant, always a consultant. So I still continue to use all that experience, I gained during those years, and continue to look at, every project as a new assignment with certain stakeholders, and I need to build the structure around this problem and do ton of research analysis within the time frame and provide the recommendation. And now one step going further, I help make the decisions, and I also live with the consequences with those decisions. So and once you have that, it's in industry, the consulting experience is valued highly. It's something a lot of companies now have started developing their internal consulting practice. They call it different ways, but you will find that a lot of strategy executives within industry or within the companies come from some sort of consulting background, because that's a good learning curve you have, where you've learned ton of things in a very quick way, and you can use that, you can apply that elsewhere. So that's another career path that you can think about.
Thank you so much, Sandeep. So here comes my next question. How does experience in management consulting help you in your current job?
Sure. I mean, as I mentioned, the work that I did back in consulting, it definitely helps. Uh, the number one thing that has helped me is, so when I started at HP, I was fairly new to the subject matter that I was getting into in terms of digital marketing. So I didn't know a ton about it, but applying my consulting lenses, I did a lot of research. I talked to a lot of folks and started getting that knowledge that I needed for doing my job. So that was number one thing that helped me a lot. If I had not done consulting, I may not had got this job, but also without consulting, I didn't have that pedigree on how you go on tackling a new area that you didn't know earlier about. Number two, of course, bringing the fresh perspective or analysis and presenting your ideas. One thing we didn't talk in this conversation is how meticulous you need to be in consulting to present your ideas. You start with a bigger picture, then you go into sort of a deep dive on analysis, and finally you bring your recommendation. Sometimes you do the reverse way as well, but uh, how you present your ideas matters a lot, and you sort of develop a knack or a style on presentations, mostly PowerPoint presentations. So uh, that has again tremendous value when it comes to even after leaving consulting. That continues to help me a lot in presenting my ideas. Uh, and third thing, one thing consulting taught me a lot was whenever you go to an assignment, you don't work for that company, or the folks that you will be working with on client side, they're not reporting to you, they're not working for you. You're just working together to solve a common problem. So how do you lead? By influencing. How do you lead? By providing the right recommendations. How do you build that trust in quick time? Those are very important things, and that is a super value when it comes to your even after leaving consulting, wherever you go in any sort of job, building the trust is of paramount value. So those are three things I get benefited from my experience.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sandeep. Thank you so much for your valuable time and participation and providing such valuable insights to us. Now, I would like to quickly share a brief story on High Counselor Inception with all of us. Why do people lag behind? People lag behind because of three major reasons. They find difficulty in getting jobs. Number one, lack of connection with company insiders, lack of information with company job position, and our candidates are not well prepared for the interview. So we solve this problem, we solve this problem by connecting job seekers with the company insiders. What do we do exactly? Suppose I want to get a job at Facebook. I could log into High Counselor website or mobile app, search for a current employee working at Facebook, and immediately book a phone or email appointment for tips and career advice. Yes, you are right. We can take one-to-one coaching from someone working in your dream company. So our counselors work in most of all the top companies, like in product consulting, technology domains, everything. So if that is target industry, definitely check out highcounselor.com. Just like this webinar, we conduct webinars every week, and we conduct webinars every week. So do not forget to sign up on our platform, High Counselor platform. It will help us to keep you posted about upcoming awesome webinars. So moreover, all our our webinar recordings are available on the YouTube channel. This webinar recording will be uploaded in next few days. Do not forget to hit the bell icon here. I'll show you guys this. Do not forget to hit the bell icon here so that you are subscribed for the upcoming awesome webinar. And make sure you do hit it so that we keep you updated about the important dates and all information. Maybe you come across the one whom you are targeting as your dream company. So if you enjoyed this webinar, I would request you all to share a word of mouth about HiCounselor on your social media channels. Finally, I hope you all found this webinar really helpful. We'll send you a survey in the next couple of days. We'll be hosting events like this regularly. So please let us know what you think so that we can ensure that you are getting maximum benefit and valuable information from those webinars. Thank you so much, Sandeep, for your valuable time and participation. We are really glad that you came here and gave such valuable advice to our attendees that were really wonderful. I'm sure all our attendees must have gained some valuable information out of it. And thank you all attendees for joining us and making it successful. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Karishma, for all the good questions. And just wanted to let our audience know that I will be signing up on the platform as a counselor. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Also, if you want to just reach out on LinkedIn, and if you mention this webinar, happy to have a chat with you. Whoever wants to have more conversation about this topic.
That's so wonderful, Sandeep. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for all the efforts. I personally really enjoyed it and a lot of valuable information. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Karishma. Bye.
Good evening. Bye.